Could Hollywood have buried some of sci-fi's strangest masterpieces on purpose? While the same blockbusters get worshipped forever, darker, weirder, and far more daring films were left behind in dusty corners of cinema history. These are not the obvious classics everyone pretends to love. These are the forgotten visions that predicted nightmares, challenged reality, and disappeared before most viewers even knew they existed. And one film on this list feels almost too dangerous to ignore. Number 15. The Secret of Steel City, 1979. A perfect city and a nightmare factory sit on opposite sides of the same dream. The Secret of Steel City is the kind of forgotten sci-fi film that feels like it was discovered inside an old locked cabinet, still carrying the dust of Cold War fear and industrial paranoia. The story follows two scientists who inherit wealth and turn it into completely different visions of the future. One builds Fortuna, a beautiful city shaped by hope, progress, and human comfort. The other creates Steel City, a harsh world of factories, weapons, smoke, and control. That contrast gives the film its strange power. It is not just about machines or inventions. It is about what happens when brilliant minds stop asking who their creations will hurt. The movie has the feeling of an old warning signal, quietly flashing from another era. Its sets, ideas, and moral conflict give it a Jules Verne-like atmosphere. But beneath that adventure surface is a darker question. What if the future is not destroyed by monsters, but by men who think destruction is progress? Number 14. Eola, 1972. Something is disappearing in space, and nobody in power wants to admit how terrifying that really is. Eola opens with a mystery that feels simple at first, then slowly turns into something colder and stranger. 8 cargo ships vanish within days, an orbital station suddenly falls silent, and the people responsible for keeping order are forced to stop all travel into a mysterious sector. That setup gives the film a quiet, eerie tension, the kind that does not need explosions to feel dangerous. Instead of racing forward like a modern space thriller, Eola moves like a secret being uncovered piece by piece. A scientist named Maria Scholl begins searching for answers, while Professor Tal seems to know more than he should. The deeper the mystery goes, the more the film becomes about hidden projects, forbidden knowledge, and the cost of reaching too far. What makes it underrated is its mood. It feels lonely, thoughtful, and strangely human. Space here is not a playground. It is a silence that may already know the truth before we do. Number 13. The Ugly Swans, 2006. The rain never stops. The children know too much, and the adults are terrified of what comes next. The Ugly Swans is not the kind of sci-fi that tries to impress you with sleek spaceships or shiny cities. It pulls you into a damp, uneasy town where something unnatural has changed the air, the people, and perhaps the future itself. A writer arrives in Tashlinsk, a place shaped by constant rain and surrounded by rumors of strange mutants who seem to possess knowledge beyond ordinary human understanding. But the most disturbing part is not the mutants. It is the children. They are drawn toward this new intelligence, almost as if they can sense that the old world has already failed them. That gives the film its quiet, unsettling power. It feels like a mystery, a warning, and a philosophical nightmare all at once. The story asks a dangerous question. What if the next stage of humanity does not need our permission? The adults cling to fear, control, and familiar rules, while the younger generation looks toward something colder, smarter, and possibly impossible to stop. The Ugly Swans is underrated because it refuses easy answers. It does not explain its world like a lecture. It lets the uncertainty crawl under your skin until you realize the real horror may be evolution itself. Number 12. Tycho Moon, 1996. A ruined future Paris becomes a hunting ground, and one missing man may be the only body worth saving. Tycho Moon feels like a dream built from broken concrete, political decay, and feverish imagination. The story unfolds in a futuristic colony ruled by the powerful McBee family, a dynasty that has turned survival into a private obsession. The city is divided into sectors, scarred by walls, watched by killers, and filled with people who seem to be living inside someone else's nightmare. At the center of it all is Tycho Moon, a mysterious figure believed to be dead, yet whispered about as if he could still be alive. Why does everyone want him? Because the ruling family is dying from a strange inherited disease, and Tycho may be the perfect donor they desperately need. That idea turns the film into something colder than a chase thriller. It becomes a story about bodies, power, and the terrifying way the rich treat other people as spare parts. Julie Delpy's presence gives the film an eerie elegance. while Enki Bilal's visual imagination makes every corner feel diseased and beautiful. Tycho Moon is not smooth mainstream sci-fi. It is strange, uneven, hypnotic, and unforgettable. It feels like the future after hope has been privatized. Number 11. The Aerial, 2007. A whole city loses its voice, and somehow that is only the beginning of the nightmare. The Aerial is one of those rare films that feels less watched than decoded, like a silent message smuggled from another era. This Argentine sci-fi fantasy takes place in a black-and-white city, where speech has been stolen by a controlling media figure known as Mr. TV. That single idea gives the movie a brilliant, disturbing hook. A society without a voice becomes a society without resistance, without memory, and without a real future. Instead of relying on ordinary dialogue, the film uses bold visual design, expressionist shadows, strange symbols, and dreamlike movement to create a world that feels both old and futuristic. It looks inspired by silent cinema, but the theme feels painfully modern. Who controls the screen? Who controls language? And what happens when people forget they ever had the power to speak for themselves? The story follows a small family trying to recover what was taken, turning a simple rescue mission into a larger fight against silence itself. What makes The Aerial so underrated is its originality. It does not copy Hollywood's sci-fi grammar. It invents its own. Watching it feels like opening an antique machine and finding a warning about the modern world still ticking inside. Number 10. Avalon, 2001. In this future, escape is illegal. Addiction wears a digital mask, and reality may already be the weakest level of the game. Avalon comes from Mamoru Oshii, the visionary mind connected to some of science fiction's most haunting questions about identity and technology. But this film is stranger, colder, and far less talked about than his more famous work. Set in a bleak dystopian world, it follows Ash, a skilled player inside an illegal virtual war game, where people risk their minds chasing money, status, and meaning. The game is not just entertainment. It is a refuge for people trapped in a lifeless society, a place where danger feels more real than ordinary existence. That is what gives Avalon its hypnotic sadness. The characters are not simply playing because they enjoy combat. They are playing because the outside world has become emotionally empty. The film's muted visuals, lonely rooms, and ghostly atmosphere make it feel like a memory slowly losing color. As Ash searches for a rumored hidden level, the story becomes less about winning and more about awakening. Is the real world truly real, or just another system pretending to be final? Avalon is underrated because it turns virtual reality into a spiritual trap. It does not shout. It quietly makes you question the screen you are staring at. Number 9. Renaissance, 2006. Future Paris looks like a crime scene, drawn in light and shadow, and every face seems to be hiding a corporate secret. Renaissance is a visually striking sci-fi thriller that deserves far more attention than it usually gets. Its world is built almost entirely in stark black and white, giving the film the feeling of a graphic novel, a noir detective story, and a cyberpunk nightmare colliding in the same frame. The plot begins with the kidnapping of Ilona, a young gene researcher whose work may be far more valuable than anyone first admits. Captain Karras is assigned to find her, but the search quickly leads into a deeper web of corporate control, medical ambition, surveillance, and the terrifying price of human perfection. What makes Renaissance fascinating is not just the mystery. It is the way the film turns every street, office, and underground passage into a visual trap. Paris is no longer romantic. It is polished, monitored, and morally frozen. The animation style can feel harsh at first, but that sharpness becomes part of its identity. This is a future where softness has been removed. Renaissance is underrated because it has the bones of a classic detective thriller, but the soul of a warning. Behind the missing scientist is a bigger question. When life itself becomes a product, who gets to decide what humanity is worth? Number 8. The Red Spectacles, 1987. A man returns to a city that looks familiar, but the rules have turned completely insane. The Red Spectacles is the kind of sci-fi that does not explain itself politely. It throws you into a future that feels like a broken memory, part noir mystery, part political nightmare, part absurd dream you cannot wake from. The story follows a former member of an elite police unit who comes back after years away, only to find a society where suspicion has become normal, and control has seeped into the smallest corners of everyday life. Even something as simple as an all-night noodle stand feels dangerous, forbidden, and strangely symbolic. That is the strange genius of the film. It takes ordinary details and twists them until they feel like evidence from a collapsed civilization. Mamoru Oshii builds the world with a dry, surreal rhythm, making the future feel less like a place of technology and more like a system of paranoia. The film is not trying to be slick or easy. It feels deliberately off balance, as if every scene is hiding a joke, a warning, and a threat at the same time. What makes The Red Spectacles underrated is how boldly it refuses mainstream sci-fi comfort. It is not about saving the galaxy. It is about one man wandering through the ruins of authority, identity, and loyalty, trying to understand whether the world changed or whether it was always this strange underneath. By the end, the movie feels like a secret file from a future government that never wanted anyone to read it. Number 7. On the Comet, 1970. The Earth does not end in fire here. It simply breaks apart and carries people into the impossible. On the Comet is one of those forgotten sci-fi adventures that feels like an old illustrated book suddenly coming alive, full of danger, wonder, and strange cosmic humor. The story begins with a wild premise. A comet passes so close to Earth that it pulls a piece of North Africa away with it, taking people, conflicts, and entire landscapes into space. That idea alone gives the film a magical, almost mythic quality. But beneath the fantasy is a sharp little experiment about human nature. Once these characters realize they are no longer on Earth in any ordinary sense, their old battles should become meaningless. Colonists, rebels, weapon dealers, fugitives, and frightened survivors are all forced to face the same terrifying truth. They are trapped together on a new world, and survival should matter more than power. But of course, people do not abandon pride that easily. That is where the film becomes more than a visual curiosity. Carl Siemens' style gives it a handmade charm, blending adventure, satire, and old-world imagination in a way modern movies rarely attempt. It feels theatrical, painted, and beautifully unreal, like science fiction from an era before everything had to look perfect. On the Comet is underrated because it turns a cosmic disaster into a playful but pointed question. If humanity was dragged into the stars tomorrow, would we become better people, or would we carry every old mistake with us? Number 6. Voyage to the End of the Universe, 1963. Long before space became loud, this film understood that the scariest sound in the universe might be silence. Voyage to the End of the Universe is a haunting piece of Czech science fiction that feels quietly ahead of its time. Instead of treating space travel like a simple adventure, it imagines a starship mission as a psychological test, a social experiment, and a slow journey into the unknown. The crew of the Icaria XB-1 travels toward Alpha Centauri, searching for life beyond Earth. But the real tension comes from what distance does to the people inside the ship. They are not just crossing space. They are carrying homesickness, fear, discipline, hope, and the pressure of being humanity's representatives in a place that may not care they exist. That gives the film a mature, eerie atmosphere. Its technology may look vintage now, but its ideas still feel surprisingly serious. You can sense later space dramas echoing its mood, the closed corridors, the uncertainty, the philosophical weight of leaving Earth behind. What makes it underrated is that it does not beg for attention. It moves with calm intelligence, trusting the viewer to feel the loneliness of deep space without constant spectacle. The mission becomes almost spiritual, asking whether contact with the unknown will save humanity, frighten it, or reveal how fragile it has always been. Voyage to the End of the Universe deserves discovery because it captures a rare kind of sci-fi wonder, not the thrill of conquest, but the quiet terror of asking who might be waiting in the dark. Number 5. Oba, The End of Civilization, 1985. Hope becomes dangerous when people are trapped long enough to worship it. Oba, The End of Civilization is not a comfortable post-apocalyptic film. It feels damp, exhausted, and claustrophobic, like civilization has been sealed underground and left to rot. After nuclear devastation, survivors live inside a decaying bunker, while clinging to the belief that a rescue vessel called the Ark will come for them. That idea should be comforting, but the film turns it into something deeply unsettling. The Ark may be real, or it may be a lie, or it may simply be the last story people tell themselves, because the truth is unbearable. The main character moves through this crumbling refuge, surrounded by hunger, desperation, bureaucracy, and fading sanity. Nobody looks heroic. Nobody feels safe. Everyone seems to be performing normal life while the walls close in. That is what makes the movie so powerful. It does not show the end of civilization as one dramatic explosion. It shows the slower horror of people surviving after meaning has collapsed. The bunker becomes a miniature world where faith, politics, and fear mix into one suffocating atmosphere. Pyotr Shulkin's vision is bleak but strangely magnetic, full of images that feel dirty, theatrical, and unforgettable. Oba is underrated because it understands that the apocalypse is not only about death. Sometimes the real nightmare is waiting for salvation so long that you no longer know whether you want the truth. Number 4. Dead Man's Letters, 1986. The world has already ended, but one man keeps writing, as if words can still reach the living. Dead Man's Letters is a devastating sci-fi film that feels less like entertainment and more like a message recovered from the ashes. Set after a nuclear catastrophe, it follows survivors moving through a pale, ruined world, where hope has become fragile and almost embarrassing. At the center is an aging intellectual who writes letters to his missing son, even though he may never know whether those words will be read. That simple act gives the film its emotional weight. In a world stripped of comfort, writing becomes resistance. Memory becomes survival. The film's atmosphere is cold, drained, and mournful, avoiding the usual action-driven vision of disaster. There are no clean heroes racing to fix everything. There are only people trying to remain human after humanity has done the unthinkable to itself. What makes Dead Man's Letters so underrated is its moral seriousness. It does not use the future as decoration. It uses science fiction as a courtroom, forcing the viewer to look at fear, responsibility, and the terrible silence after collapse. Konstantin Lopushansky gives the film a ghostly visual texture, as if every room has already become a tomb. Yet there is still tenderness inside it, especially in the need to speak to someone who may be gone forever. Dead Man's Letters is not easy viewing, but that is exactly why it lingers. It asks a question most sci-fi avoids. After the end, what remains of the soul? Number 3. The Quiet Earth, 1985. One man wakes up alone, and the silence of the world becomes louder than any alien invasion. The Quiet Earth begins with one of the most haunting ideas in science fiction. What if you opened your eyes and discovered that almost everyone had vanished? No crowds, no traffic, no ordinary morning noise. Just empty streets and a terrifying freedom that slowly turns poisonous. The film follows a scientist who appears to be the last person alive, and his loneliness gives the story an eerie psychological pull. At first, the empty world seems almost surreal, even darkly comic. He can take what he wants, go where he wants, act without consequence. But the fantasy quickly decays. Without other people, identity begins to loosen. Reality itself starts to feel unstable. When he eventually finds others, the film shifts from isolation into tension, suspicion, and uncomfortable human drama. That is what makes it more than a simple last man on Earth story. The real mystery is not only where everyone went, it is what kind of people remain when the old world disappears. The Quiet Earth is underrated because it turns a massive sci-fi concept into something intimate and disturbing. Its power comes from empty spaces, strange emotional shifts, and an ending that still feels like a door opening into cosmic uncertainty. It does not explain everything neatly, and that is part of its spell. Some films solve their mysteries. This one leaves you staring into the unknown, wondering whether survival was a miracle, an accident, or a punishment. Number 2. Kinzaza, 1986. Two ordinary men press the wrong button, and suddenly the universe reveals itself as a ridiculous, brutal joke. Kinzaza is one of the strangest sci-fi films ever made, and that is exactly why it deserves a place near the top. The setup sounds almost absurd. Two Soviet citizens are accidentally transported to the desert planet Pluk, a world with bizarre rules, telepathic locals, strange machines, and a social order built on nonsense that somehow feels painfully recognizable. But the deeper the film goes, the sharper it becomes. Pluk may look ridiculous, but its customs expose greed, class division, status obsession, and the emptiness of systems people obey without questioning. The genius of Kinzaza is that it hides social commentary inside deadpan comedy and alien weirdness. The planet feels cheap, dusty, and worn out, not like a glossy fantasy world. That roughness makes it believable in a strange way. It is not the future as a dream. It is the future as a broken marketplace where dignity has a price and language itself has been reduced to absurd signals. The film's humor is dry, patient, and unforgettable. But underneath the comedy is a sadness about how easily people accept humiliating rules if everyone around them acts like they are normal. Kinzaza is underrated because it manages to be hilarious, bleak, philosophical, and completely original at once. It feels like a cult artifact from another planet. But the uncomfortable truth is that Pluk may not be as alien as it first appears. Number 1. On the Silver Globe, 1988. Some films feel lost because people forgot them. This one feels lost because history tried to bury it alive. On the Silver Globe stands at number 1 because it has the rare, dangerous aura of a movie that should not exist in any ordinary form. Andrzej Żuławski's unfinished sci-fi epic begins with astronauts landing on a distant planet, where their descendants build a new society filled with myth, violence, belief, and confusion. Many years later, another astronaut arrives and is treated like a messianic figure, turning the story into something far larger than a space adventure. It becomes a savage investigation of civilization itself. How do religions begin? How does power disguise itself as destiny? How quickly do humans turn survival into ritual, hierarchy, and sacrifice? The film's production history only adds to its legend, because what remains feels wounded, incomplete, and somehow more haunting because of that damage. Missing pieces are not just flaws here. They become part of the experience, making the movie feel like an archaeological discovery from a future that collapsed before anyone could fully explain it. Visually, it is wild, physical, overwhelming, and often difficult. But that difficulty is exactly what gives it power. On the Silver Globe is underrated because it refuses to behave like normal cinema. It does not simply show another planet. It throws you into the birth of a broken world and dares you to recognize humanity inside it. By the end, the question is not what happened to that planet. The question is whether Earth ever looked any different. So the next time someone says science fiction began and ended with the famous classics, remember these hidden worlds. Some were strange, some were difficult, some were nearly forgotten, but each one dared to imagine the future differently. Which of these lost visions deserves a second life? Drop your pick below and stay curious, because cinema still has buried galaxies,